Well, hey folks, it's your old pal King Waspinator here. And a little under 24 hours ago, I picked me up a copy of the new Dungeons & Dragons campaign setting called Mythic Odysseys of Theros. It feels like it's been forever since I first originally saw this was coming out and been waiting to see it, but the day has finally arrived. And so, I haven't read the whole thing cover to cover yet, obviously, but I have given it a good skimming over to kind of get some first impressions and kind of get them out there. I'm thinking as things go along, I might make a few more videos delving a bit further into the setting, because I very much like the potential it has that I see in it so far, let's say. So, where to begin? So the basics is that Mythic Odysseys of Theros is based on a Magic the Gathering setting. Now, I haven't played Magic the Gathering since 1997, so I have no idea what Theros is like in the card game, but from what I see going through the book that I have had a chance to go through so far, it doesn't seem to be very wedded to needing to know anything about it. It's packaged as such that you don't have to be a Magic the Gathering fan or be familiar with the cards or anything. I was a little trepidatious at first about getting it because it was based on a Magic the Gathering setting, that they might have changes to the magic system to try to reflect the land-based elementalism of Magic the Gathering magic, but it's not at all like that. It does have an interesting new rule dynamic that is a reward for player role-playing, because the setting is very much based on ancient Greek myth. Think Clash of the Titans and Jason and the Argonauts, classic Ray Harryhausen movies, or Hercules, The Legendary Journeys, and Xena Warrior Princess, or even the modern Clash of the Titans films, and all the old Greek legends of old. Stories of Perseus, Theseus, Hercules, all apply. It's a setting that is very wedded to its pantheon of gods, which thankfully, unlike, say, for instance, in classic AD&D days in Planescape, you had actual Earth, real-world gods from our own history and our own myth bound up into the D&D setting, kind of half-assedly in planes such as Aboria. And in some ways, my surface read of Mythic Odysseys of Theros is it does kind of almost feel like a campaign set in the Arborian dimension from Planescape, except detached from all the other planes and all of Planescape's particular coloration. And there's a lot of things I like about it so far. I like the mix of races. Characters start off as a new thing to add on top of, characters' race, class, and background. They have supernatural gifts, which is sort of a supernatural origin that shows that the characters have been touched by or being watched over by the gods, or a god in particular, and characters are encouraged to have a particular god that they're attached to. And they now have a piety score. And as a character, through role-playing, over the course of a game session, will earn, 1 or 2 piety points, depending on their actions and how well they're furthering the cause of their god, or they're following the dictates of their god, as a role-playing reward. And as their piety goes up, they unlock better and better abilities. So it gives them an extra edge in order to be able to tackle the challenges of the setting. As I said, it has an interesting mix of races. Right off the bat, it's got humans, of course. They're, as always, the majority race of the world. They're broken up into 3 main civilizations. Akros, which is kind of an analogy for Sparta. Meletis, which, from what I'm looking at so far, kind of reminds me a bit of Athens and Thebes, a little bit blended together. And then you have Satessa, which is almost kind of like a Greek druidic kind of society, and I'm not sure so far. Like I said, I haven't had a chance yet to read this thing cover to cover yet, and I'm not at all familiar with the Magic the Gathering variant of the Theros setting. So I'm coming into this just with complete fresh eyes. So I'm not yet quite sure exactly what Satessa is modeled on. It might be kind of more of an original setting feature, I guess, to detach it and make it more of a fantasy world, because it's a blending of Greek, type society, but mingled in with a lot of like elven nature kind of stuff. But speaking of elves, there's no elves in this. Thank you. There are a couple other Fey races though. This game gives stats for satyrs finally, both male and female, not just male only satyrs. It has centaurs, which is something I've missed centaurs and borears being available in D&D for a long time. It represents minotaurs for 5th edition. It uses tritons from, I believe they come from Volo's Guide to Monsters is where they premiered, or at least the modern 5th edition version. They have tritons in this. They're a little bit stylistically different, but in terms of statistics and racial abilities, they're identical to the tritons from Volo's Guide. But instead of having hair, they have like a big crested fin on their head and stuff like that. They're little artistic type changes that have no effect on the actual skeleton of how the character operates. And they also present a new race of cat people that is not tabaxi at all. I double checked, they do not have the same kind of statistic adjustments or anything. These are a lion-based feline race called the Leonin, which are kind of almost atheistic in the sense that they know the gods are real, but they don't worship them, they distrust them, they stand against them, they think they're dangerous. So maybe, I don't know, agnostic might be a better term, but kind of like a militant, watchful agnosticism in a world where they know the gods exist. The gods are very important to how this setting operates, and a thing I do really commend this book on already is the amount of detail they have given to the pantheons. Instead of just like a paragraph or two on the different gods, each god has several pages of information on how that god thinks, operates, how it wants its cultists to act, its influence over the mortal realm, and all sorts of tips on using them for, you know, patrons for adventuring groups or for particular adventurers, or to have them be main villains for a large epic campaign. It also details several, you know, locations to use in game, with even some maps of particular kind of locations that are associated with that god, either a specific place or maybe a common kind of feature, like, you know, watchtowers that are associated with this god, or a specific temple that is associated with this other god. They are obviously very cut and paste lifted off of our own Greek gods, but they're not the same. They have overtones of a lot of them, but they're not identical. There's a bigger difference between their setup of their gods and the Greek gods than, say, how the Roman gods are, you know, just perfect copies. The Roman gods were the Star Wars The Force Awakens to the Greek gods Star Wars A New Hope. And this at least tries to be its own beast. And as I say, it gives a tremendous amount of detail on each of the gods. So I look forward to going into deeper detail about that in further videos. The artwork, as always, you can't say that Wizards of the Coast era D&D has not always had really high quality artwork. But the setting itself is just fabulous. I like that it uses a kind of curated selection of monsters. Instead of just throwing this big hodgepodge of everything in the bag in the world, it's obviously, you take characters, creatures and such, NPCs, stuff out of the monster manual, anything that is specifically Greek, ancient Mediterranean in origin type creatures. That's it. You're not going to be running into stuff out of Norse mythology or South American mythology. You're not going to have an encounter with a Quetzalcoatl. This is all sphinxes and minotaurs and all that kind of stuff, which is fine. I think personally, from my own way of running D&D, this very much fits into my kind of personal style, in that it's a much more limited amount of player races and a tailored selection of creatures from the monster manual to throw at them. So in total, there's 15 gods that they are fully detailed to a depth that is not shown in pretty much any other D&D supplement so far, except maybe some of the demon lords and devil commanders and whatnot that you get in Mordenkainen and Tomes of Foes, but like actually easily 3 or 4 times more material on each of these 15 gods. They also feature some radically different giants from the normal giants that we're used to out of the Monster Manual, so that should be interesting for players or for experienced players who are used to fighting critters and knowing exactly what they're up to. They greatly expand nymphs, obviously because nymphs are a creature of Greek myth, so there's a greater variety of nymphs, not just tree nymphs as presented in standard Dungeons & Dragons. You also get other kind of alternate things like alternate harpies. Krakens are treated a bit more variable. They're not just all giant squid creatures. They also have an interesting thing where, because of the cosmology of this setting is more simplified compared to other D&D games, it's kind of a pocket universe unto itself that is detached from the rest of the big planar crux, where you have the inner planes of the elemental beings, and then you have the outer shell of the material world suspended in the phlogiston, and then beyond that you have the outer planes of good and evil, law and order, chaos and neutrality, which are all based on ideas and concepts, and the dwelling places of the gods. Theros is self-contained and just as a basic, simple, 3-layered continuum that has no Shadowfell, has no Feywild. You just have the mortal world, which is a mythic mortal world. If you sail far enough out to sea, you will fall off the edge, kind of thing. It does not try to make itself realistic. Outside of the zone that is civilized, there's basically a little bit of wilderness, and then you get more sea, and then you fall off the world. It's relatively small space. And then you have a dimension for the underworld, classic Greek type thing, and there's even guidelines on having characters travel into the underworld for adventuring purposes, and also something that's really ironic, because in the last campaign I ran, I ended up doing that a bit towards the end, of having characters get killed, but their adventures continue on in their afterlife, because there's a total party kill kind of scenario. So it provides that in here, and also has things for beings that return to life out of the underworld, but they come back changed. But they also have the heavens as the third dimension, and there's interesting kind of setting design features, like, you know, the mythology of the world is constantly playing out in animated constellations in the night sky, and the night sky itself is just kind of a portal to the heavens, I guess. I still need to read a bit more about exactly how Nyx interacts with the real world, but it's the dwelling of the gods and dreams, and thoughts can shape reality out there and all that kind of stuff, and there's kind of like pocket zones and things that are possible up in the night sky, and that you have a different layer to add to the creatures that you have available by having Nyx-born creatures, beings that are created by the gods directly. They'll have the same stats as the normal version of whatever it is they are, but they'll have some unique magical property that you can randomly determine or select from. And I find the interesting, I guess, cosmetic feature that all the parts of their body that fall into shadow, you see stars, you see the night sky in it, instead of seeing just the shadowed features and stuff, which they use interestingly in a lot of the art on the cover and throughout the book. And I think it's just kind of interesting aesthetic that adds it's a very glory to the gods. This is not trying to be pseudo-realistic medieval Europe or anything like that. This is ancient times, living in pure myth. The calendar is kind of vague, and I like that. There is no nailed down, you know, like every year for the last 10,000 years all has historical notes like it is in Forgotten Realms and whatnot. So it's much more vague and can be played with, and there's a lot of room for DMs to take this and kind of make of it of you will. I find that because of the relationship that the player characters have to their personal gods in order to be able to advance their piety, that I think that should give this game a good potential to be a good sandbox type playing experience. unless you want to, as the DM, if you have specific things in mind for how you want your campaign to go, you might want to direct your players to choose from specific gods and not just give them free reign. But there's just things about it that strike me as being an ideal setting for a much more character-driven narrative, as opposed to you having specific events that you want to have happen. It kind of just leave it more to them to roam around for a while until they discover some great big epic quest to go on for their later levels. I also think that, especially because of the supernatural gifts aspect, that it's a good setting for smaller player groups, I would think. The adventure that is included inside of it, which I have not had a chance to look over at all I know is that it has something to do with a returned in one of the gods, is designed for 4 to 6 players, but while reading through it and just the general vibe of the setting in terms of like the myths that are presented, the artwork, the power levels of the player characters because of getting extra gifts, I feel like this is much more ideal for smaller player groups. Like if you want to have a solo D&D campaign, this wouldn't be a bad choice, or if you only have 2 or 3 people, this would be a good choice, because it gives that little extra something to beef up the characters so that they can still face the challenge level monsters that match where they would be if they were in a 5+ size player character group. So I guess for now that's what I have to say about it. It's a good book if you're into collecting D&D books. It's certainly worth the $30 I spent on it so far. I plan to do a few more videos on a few like deeper cut subjects on it. And I just put up a thing on meetup.com trying to fish up a couple new players, because I'd rather get a few experienced D&D players. I'm a bit tired of playing with non-nerds from work who are just curious about D&D because of TV shows they've seen. So if you're in the Austin area and you are free on Thursdays and you'd like to play Mythic Odysseys of Theros, feel free to hit up King Waspinator on Twitter. And other than that, we'll talk to you when we talk to you.